Welcome back, everyone, to the Libertas International Podcast. It's me again, your host, Tyler. I'm super excited for this conversation with Matt Pierce from HealEx. He's the expert in human trafficking in Salt Lake City. The work that he's doing is nothing short of incredible. And it's a really vulnerable conversation. It's a really raw conversation about what the realities look like here in the United States, and specifically up there in Salt Lake City with the clients that he's working with and the patients that he's working with. He's kind of a soft-spoken guy, so you may have trouble hearing his voice. I had the best microphone I've got on his side of the table, and so you may have to adjust the volume a little bit. Soft-spoken in voice, but man, the guy's got a heart of a lion. And I'm so excited to share this conversation. He's a good buddy of mine. He's supported me in what I've done. I've supported him in what he's done. And I know that a lot of people will benefit from this conversation and how real and authentic and raw this conversation gets. And so I'm happy to welcome Matt Pierce, the founder of HealEx, to the podcast, to the Libertas International Podcast today. Welcome, Matt, to the Libertas International Podcast. I'm so pumped that you're here. You're chilling in my apartment, drinking your drink. Thanks for braving the rain and coming and hanging out with me this morning.
Yeah, man. Stoked to be here.
Well, let's start with your story, bro. I know you got a really interesting story on how you ended up working anti-human trafficking, what you're doing now. So give us a rundown of your journey, how you ended up where you're doing, and give the listeners. We have around the episode will come out around Christmas time. And right now we have around 300 listeners. So hopefully we triple that by Christmas. But tell your listeners of what you've got going on and your story and how you ended up working anti-human trafficking.
So I'm currently the founder and executive director of HealEx. It's a nonprofit based in Utah. And we provide services directly to survivors of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And that work for me has been a long journey, like a decade or more now. But basically it got started while I was doing a lot of humanitarian work with various nonprofits, and I was providing different social services to really vulnerable and marginalized people. And while I was doing that, I discovered that the most vulnerable and marginalized people that I worked with were people suffering from sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And so I decided to really gear my entire career towards learning about that issue and finding innovative ways to serve those individuals and help them heal from trauma. A lot of my work is really focused around the fact that trauma is kind of the crux issue with trafficking and exploitation. And when you help people heal from trauma, you can help them really end that slavery cycle. And so my work is really focused on the intersection of trafficking and exploitation and trauma and healing.
And so you, in your journey to start HealEx, you saw medicine as an avenue to reach these vulnerable people. How did you, I guess when people reach out to, like me, for example, on LinkedIn, and they want to get involved, usually it's on the law enforcement side. How do I become a law enforcement official to go knock down doors or whatever they do? And you saw this avenue of reaching vulnerable people, not through a law enforcement avenue, but through medicine. Tell me how you got to that point and the benefits you've seen of that, some of maybe the fallbacks, if there's been any, how using medicine allow you to serve people that are vulnerable that you're working with.
So I studied public health and medicine. I studied medicine at the University of Utah. While I was doing a lot of humanitarian work, particularly in Haiti, in the Caribbean, I was running community health worker programs, mobile clinics, programs essentially designed to help vulnerable people access healthcare. And as I did that, I discovered that I could access people in really, really rough or remote or vulnerable or marginalized situations, people that other people weren't accessing with other services. I could access them through medicine. And then I was running a clinic actually in Salt Lake. It was a mobile clinic. And discovered that about 100 of my patients on that mobile clinic would tell me their stories. They really trusted me a lot because I was providing free healthcare to them. And they started telling me their stories and explaining their situations to me in more detail. Because I was really intimately involved with their day-to-day life, you know? I'd go out on this mobile clinic and find them in these really horrible places, and they were in really bad situations, and I would just ask them, like, what's going on? Why are you using so much heroin, and why are you in this terrible motel, and, like, what is going on? And they would tell me the whole story about how they ended up there, and they would never say, well, I'm being trafficked. They'd never say that. They didn't understand that. They didn't have that terminology. But they would explain to me this story of being taken advantage of, and this story about sexual exploitation. And I discovered that through medicine, through providing a physically healing service, I could access people who no one else really had this kind of access to. And the access that I established was different from other opportunities. It's therapeutic access, meaning I'm not a law enforcement officer. I'm not going to them undercover and trying to divulge or get them to divulge information that I need in order to prosecute a case, prosecute a crime. I'm just developing this really authentic therapeutic relationship. And by doing that, it develops this deep trust. And so they start to talk about what's really happening in a really authentic, candid way. And medicine really became the access point for that. But the beauty of that is that it's not just access to finding out about their stories and kind of this voyeuristic thing, like I want to dig deep into their dark lives. It's this therapeutic relationship where as I provide physical healing care, they begin to engage more deeply in their emotional and psychological healing. And their self-worth really begins to improve because I'm not just accessing them to get info, I'm accessing them to help them heal, to serve them authentically. So that's why medicine became my access point.
Well, you give me that's a very you give me a lot of information to go on. I have some notes written here about some of the stuff that I know that you've done and some of the stuff you mentioned that I didn't know you've done. I want to steer the conversation out of Salt Lake for now and then come back to Salt Lake because I know that's where HealEx is based and where it's serving currently. But before that, I have a question that will probably get some emails on the podcast. Do you think the American healthcare system is set up to serve the people that you're serving? And we can end this out if you don't feel comfortable answering this question, that's totally cool. But I'm just curious because you giving them healthcare in this van, this mobile clinic. Do you now your full-time job I think is working in the healthcare system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you believe the American healthcare system is set up to serve the people that you're currently serving using HealEx?
Yeah, good question. So I've worked internationally quite a bit in the healthcare system in a lot of different places. So I have a decent reference for healthcare systems compared to the U.S. healthcare system. The U.S. healthcare system is actually really fantastic compared to a lot of other places, but it's really unique because it's a massive country with just loads of diversity, and so it's hard to compare it, to a smaller country's healthcare system. That being said, there are constantly gaps that we deal with our patients. So when I say these people are the most vulnerable and marginalized and underserved people in your community, I'm not just exaggerating. I started to work with these people because that was their situation. And that means being those things, being vulnerable, marginalized, and underserved, means that the system that you're living in, the social system, isn't set up well to help you. So yeah, there's totally gaps. And that's part of the reason that I run a nonprofit. If there was a government entity or a naturally occurring private healthcare system entity that already was doing what was needed for these individuals, I wouldn't have started a whole nonprofit. That's a big undertaking. It's a big endeavor. And unless you're for real filling a gap, it's not really worth starting a nonprofit. And so I started one because there's this major gap in the system. No one's providing specific tailored care to this population, and when they want to exit that situation, the healthcare system is not well set up to provide the trauma-informed care and the substance use care that they need.
That's a good answer. That it's complicated.
It is super complicated.
I think the healthcare system is super complicated, and you gave a good segue to our next to my next questions. But the thank you for that answer. That was a very good answer, and it helps me to understand. I studied healthcare administration in college, and honestly, the stuff that I gain knowledge of is probably super outdated because the healthcare system changed constantly with every single administration that comes in. And when I was in college, the big thing is that we were studying Obamacare. Mm-hmm. It was our main thing that we were studying, that we were learning about, and that was just prior to the 2016 election. That was 2 administrations ago. I'm sure the stuff that I learned is super outdated by now. So it's I appreciate your response. When I first met you, we were at the drop-in center in Salt Lake City. I think you were living in your van. I think super long hair, and you. I was just fascinated by your story. You were doing the clinic. Obviously, like your heart, we connected. This had to been like 6 years ago, right? Something like 6 years ago.
2016 or maybe 2017.
Okay, and you mentioned it had to have been 2017.
Probably, yeah.
Haiti has had such a key part of your story, and probably still does, I would assume.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell me about Haiti. The floor is yours. Tell me all you want about Haiti, what you did there, how many times you've been back there, what you've done, what you've seen, how it's impacted you. Tell me about, and then Haiti. A lot of our followers that follow this podcast are very knowledgeable on Latin American news, mm-hmm. and so obviously with the assassination of the president, to the gang takeovers. Mm-hmm. I think now the most recent study that I read from Insight Crime, this new site that I follow, is that Haiti overtook El Salvador and Honduras as the most gang-controlled state in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I believe it. It's
pretty
rough.
So I mean, Haiti's out in the news. People know about Haiti. It's so I'm curious to know your story in Haiti, what you did there, and the stuff that you accomplished while you were there.
Yeah, so I got involved in Haiti. I had no intentions of ever really getting involved in Haiti specifically. I didn't speak the language. It's the language in Haiti is only spoken in Haiti.
Yep.
There's this 1/3 of a small island in the Caribbean that speaks this language. That's it. So anyway, I was studying in my undergrad public health, and I just had this really strong feeling like I needed to move forward with this vision that I had for my life of going and working with people in really vulnerable and marginalized situations. And so I was actually looking at a project in South Africa. I had a friend there. I was looking at going there and working on a project during my undergrad, or maybe getting involved in a project like in Latin America. I was learning Spanish, and all those things were happening. And then I met the executive director of this really small nonprofit that was working in Haiti. And they asked me to help them with a community health program, to actually run their community health program that coming summer. And it just clicked. It felt like it was the right thing for me to be doing, the right place to go. So I just jumped into the project full on, and kind of took what they had, which wasn't much at the time, and revamped their program to make a community health worker program, base it off of what Paul Farmer and Partners in Health was doing in Haiti. Anyway, so I went down that summer and lived there for 4 months. Didn't speak the language, had created this program, and it turned out the people that I was working with down there, my local partner on the project, his name was Stanley, awesome guy, didn't speak any English, and I didn't speak any Creole. But in order to make this project work, someone had to figure out the other person's language. So I was in his country, and I said, I'm going to learn Creole. So I just really dedicated myself that summer. And by the end of the summer, I was running the project fluently in Haitian Creole. And so that really launched my work in Haiti from there. Because once you've spent several months living in the country, not just there on a week trip where you're kind of being led around. I lived there in the city in a house like a local. I lived on the roof of this house in Leogan, which was the epicenter of the 2010 earthquake. And so once you speak the language and have that in-country experience and have a bunch of connections in the country, you end up going back there. So other groups who, through the grapevine found out about me and what I had done and my language skills said, hey, you want to come run a project with us? And so the next summer I went back, ran another project in a adjacent community out in the mountains, lived there for 3 months. Then I went back after that with those same community, lived there for a month running some mobile clinics. After that, I did a bunch of disaster relief work because I'd run mobile clinics, was a medical professional, I was an EMT at the time, spoke the language fluently, was young and healthy. So, disaster relief projects made a lot of sense. I'd be flying around on little Cessna planes or helicopters to remote places and running mobile clinics to try and help people. There was a hurricane, for example, in 2016. I was down there for that. I ran a bunch of projects with orphanages and really vulnerable youth there. So projects to help provide social support to them or material support that they needed. I've done a little bit of anti-trafficking work there. And the most recent time I was there was in the last earthquake that happened. Things have been really rough in Haiti. The president was assassinated. Rule of law has kind of fallen apart. And I was there for a disaster relief project after the most recent earthquake. But I haven't been there since. Things are probably too dangerous for me to be traveling around Haiti right now.
Yeah, I see a lot of missionaries down there that get kidnapped, American missionaries. And Haiti, it's interesting to hear you talk about this, because I'll never forget the first time I went to Haiti, where I was in the airport with a bunch of people that were all wearing like matching shirts, like the colors, classic, like missionaries or church groups, and everyone had like the cross on, and that was all. No one was coming to Haiti that was Haitian. It was all just Americans, and they all had matching shirts. And I was like, where the heck am I?
Yeah.
And I sat down with this lady who told me, I told her this story about American intervention in Haiti, and she told me this story of this community where this NGO went in looking to serve women that had HIV, to help them set up small businesses, to help them get ahead economically. And after 6 months of doing that, the population of women that had HIV in that village like tripled. And they were like, what is going on? And it come to find out that through the grapevine, it was the people in the village were like, hey, if you have HIV, these Americans will give you money for a business. And so women that didn't have HIV sought out men that did have HIV to give them the virus. They could get this loan of like $300 from these American missionaries. And so this group left because they, in the end, I believe they believed that they did more damage than they did good. And I feel like that's kind of the story of Haiti. And so like when you're working in Haiti, how do you ensure, first off, is my conception correct? Like I don't pretend to be an expert in Haiti. I've only been down there twice, and it was just a week each time. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Haiti in any sense of the word. Is that assumption correct? Have you seen the effects of bad intervention in Haiti? And when you're working in Haiti, how do you ensure that you empower the people versus creating a dependent population? Mm-hmm. And Haiti is so hard anyway because it's the state that it is. Mm-hmm. So how do you go about doing more good than harm in your work in Haiti?
Yeah, that's like a pretty classic. Stories like that are pretty classic.
Oh gosh.
So Haiti, unfortunately, Haiti, people think in the international development space, a lot of people think of Haiti as kind of the microcosm for international development gone wrong, and developing like dependencies and like a culture of dependency on foreign aid. People think of Haiti that way a lot. And I have definitely seen that in Haiti a lot. Which is really unfortunate. So in my work, all of the projects that I did were based on just like really good ethics of development work to not develop dependency. So for example, the main projects I ran there that I really got started on in Haiti were community health worker programs. And so what that looks like is going into a community, developing good relationships with the people who are already the infrastructure of that community and kind of the heart of that community, and finding out what their health needs are, and then offering to help them create a program where native people from their community who are going to stay there and live there and work there want to learn skills to provide basic healthcare education and frontline care to other people in their community, to their neighbors. And then sometimes there are incentives to that model, and you find ways that work well for that community. But I also ran some where the incentive was simply just people wanted the education and they wanted to serve their community. So it's a very raw, authentic, altruistic kind of programming. So most of what I did was that kind of thing. The other thing that I found to be really helpful was having really solid relationships with people there who you could really trust. And that can be really hard when people are in desperate circumstances. People that you trust a lot can
burn you the easiest.
Definitely burn you. Yeah. You and I both have enough experience with it.
They say that in a knife fight, the one that will do the most damage to you is the one that comes from behind.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, but my successes there were really around having solid relationships with people that I could really trust and maintaining really good boundaries around that so that they were not put in situations where they would potentially do unethical things. But that is part of the reason that trafficking and exploitation is such an issue in Haiti, is because people get really desperate, and it kind of creates this culture of taking advantage of other people really easily, Yeah.
So after Haiti, you spent some time in Tijuana, Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm. I've spent quite a bit of time in Tijuana.
So how do you go from Haiti to Tijuana?
So it's actually really interesting. So I speak Haitian Creole and Spanish fluently,
so you're king of the Caribbean with that language.
No, not really. I need to learn some other languages. But Tijuana is actually really interesting because recently, well, at least in the last couple of years, a lot of people from Haiti have immigrated to South America. And then on their way to get into the United States, many of them ended up in Tijuana, on that border of San Diego and Tijuana. So I went to Tijuana to do research looking at if we could expand a HealEx program to Tijuana to help serve sexually exploited people there. And what I found was there was this very large population of Haitian immigrants on the border of Tijuana with no access to services, as well as many people from all over Latin America. So Tijuana made a lot of sense. The other thing is you actually see a lot of the same issues that you see in Salt Lake City and a lot of American cities in Tijuana, because it's a border town. And so you see the same drug traffic, which means you see the same substance use issues, the same homelessness issues, the same immigrant issues. They're just, they could be a lot more magnified and a lot more intense, but it's all the same basic issues, as well as sexual exploitation. Much more intense, culturally a little bit different, but basically the same stuff. So I ended up there working in a free clinic, and I was doing a bunch of research to see if we couldn't expand down there, and hopefully we will at some point.
Well, that's awesome. I knew that you'd spent some time in TJ. I didn't know that a lot of it was spent following the Haitian, the migration and coming up to the States. It seems like Haiti is such a key part of your story. And
man, I had some crazy, so I was working in this clinic there, and we had this patient. She comes in and she's pregnant, and she's Haitian. She's from Haiti. And she was there because she had a cockroach in her ear. So we flushed the cockroach out. Yeah, pretty intense. Not great living conditions for Haitians in Tijuana, but better than Haiti. Anyway, so I was like, what's your story? I spent a lot of time in Haiti. What's your story? We're talking in Creole. So what happened was Haiti has decent immigration relationships with Chile and Brazil. And so she got on a plane, somehow got herself to Chile because of these good relationships. And then she was living in Chile. There's a lot of Haitians in Chile. And then she and some other people decided it was time to head to the United States for better opportunities. So she, in her flip-flops and dress, walked from Chile all the way up to Tijuana.
Walked?
Over 3 months. She walked. She'd take cars here and there. She'd get a ride, jump on a train here and there. But basically walked. She was on foot. She didn't have a bike. There's nothing. she's walking through like the jungle in Panama, sleeping on the ground in the jungle with these other people from Haiti.
Oh my gosh.
Just these harrowing stories, gets to the border in Tijuana, crosses, is in the United States in a matter of months, I believe, and then was deported to Haiti. But because she'd established, I don't actually understand how it all works diplomatically, but she's established some kind of residency or status in Tijuana in Mexico. So she eventually was able to go straight from Haiti back to Mexico and was living in Tijuana when I met her. But yeah, so I'm really into the outdoors. I climb a lot, backpack, bike, canyoneer, this kind of stuff. And I'm always like listening to interesting podcasts, watching cool documentaries about people doing these really cool outdoor adventure feats, like backpacking across or biking across some huge area or whatever it is, right? And then I hear this woman who's just like, yeah, I was in my dress and flip-flops for 3 months, slept on the ground in the jungle in Panama. I didn't have a big backpack with a bunch of gear, no jet boil, right? Like super hardcore. And no one even knows about these stories, right? No one
they do now.
About these people. Yeah, it's amazing.
Did you get the cockroach out?
yeah. Poor lady.
It's such an interesting thing that you talk about too, because I had a case maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago, during kind of the height and the downturn of the pandemic, where we had this case of this Haitian girl that was trafficked to Chile. And she was in Chile, and they wanted to reunite the mother with the daughter. But Haitian immigrants get a lot less compassion than other immigrants in the region, maybe that are from Venezuela or El Salvador, because of the language thing.
Yeah.
Because they don't speak Spanish, and a lot of people in Latin America don't speak Creole or French. And so we had this holdup because the only flights that were doing flights to Chile at that time, because Chile was one of the last countries to lessen their pandemic restrictions, was Panama. And Panama was not going to have this Haitian mother from Haiti fly into to that country, even for a layover, for the fear that she might stay. And so this process that could have taken 2 days at most. You book her a flight in Haiti, she hops on a plane, gets to Panama, has her layover, and then she's in Chile. It was like a 7 or 8 month process because of the pandemic and because of the restrictions that Panama had put on Haitian immigrants. And so that story, like, it breaks my heart, and it just also like doesn't surprise me, to where Haiti, like, if you study their history, like, they've almost been set up to fail from the start, where it's the intervention, the slave state, the language, even like on the spiritual side with the conspiracy theories that come on the spiritual side of their voodoo practices, and it makes it to where for a Haitian that's looking to leave that situation, makes it really hard.
It's really hard.
And it sucks.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Because the Haitians that I've met, some of them have been, like, they know 5 or 6 languages, like, they're incredibly smart. They're just trapped in this political situation, this where they grew up, the language that they were given, and it makes it hard for them to leave, and it's really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is really heartbreaking.
So you spend time in Mexico, you spend time in Haiti. I want to bring it back to Salt Lake City, because I'll never forget, we went on a ride. Matt took me on a ride along once in his van, and watching Matt with his backpack on, serving these survivors, these victims in Salt Lake City. I won't mention any names, but coming into the van, having them have their needs met by Matt, watching him listen, watching him serve these people, I was like, it's one of those moments for me where you catch a glimpse into seeing someone do what they were born to do, and it was just really cool. I was like, this guy's gonna do some really cool things for people here in Salt Lake City. And I know that you had, quite the journey that led you to Salt Lake City, because you're not originally from here. You're from Maryland?
Yeah, I grew up in Maryland.
Okay. So now you're living in Salt Lake City. You're serving victims of trafficking here in Salt Lake City. So I just want to, for those that might not know, I'll ask you, what does trafficking look like here in Salt Lake City? What are the realities of it? What is it for the average listener that maybe is just listening to this and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that trafficking is happening in Salt Lake City. What does it look like?
Yeah, it's very misunderstood.
Extremely, I would assume.
And it's sad because when we misunderstand an issue like this, it further marginalizes, it makes people more vulnerable, and it's very not helpful.
Well, I have on my list here of questions, misconceptions in Salt Lake City, misconceptions of trafficking in Salt Lake City. You're more than welcome to start there, because that was one of my questions anyway, and lead into what it really looks like, or the floor is yours.
I'm going to set this up. So at HealEx, we conceptualize this. We have something we call a slavery equation. And so with the slavery equation, it helps us really conceptualize and understand the experience of someone who's being sexually exploited, or essentially in modern day slavery. So if you take an individual who has a bunch of vulnerabilities, like let's talk about sexual exploitation. So let's say this is a girl who is growing up in a relatively dysfunctional household. Maybe there's substance use in the home. Maybe there's like a low socioeconomic status, like things that make her vulnerable. And when we're vulnerable, it's more likely for us to experience trauma. So, for example, this girl growing up in a rough home is more likely to be abused than someone growing up in a really great home where no one's being abused, right? So she gets abused, or she experiences something really traumatic. And trauma makes us more vulnerable to experience more trauma. So if you've experienced abuse as a child, you're more likely to experience more abuse because of the way that trauma affects us emotionally and psychologically. And so people kind of get stuck in this cycle of vulnerability and trauma. And then someone comes along and takes advantage of this cycle by offering this girl something that she perceivably needs in exchange for something that this person wants. For example, in the experience of sexual exploitation, a buyer comes along and offers this girl money, something that she needs to survive, in exchange for something that's essentially been devalued to this girl, like sex. If she's been sexually abused over and over, she's vulnerable to being taken advantage of this way. And this is called sexual exploitation. Anytime there's a power differential and someone's offering someone something of value in exchange for sex, we call this sexual exploitation. They're taking advantage of her vulnerabilities and her trauma cycle. And then trafficking happens when a third party comes along and takes additional advantage of that cycle, or makes that cycle go. Makes that cycle, like continues or perpetuates that cycle in order to benefit from it. So that being said, trafficking can look like, we have a person we've been working with recently. She's in her 20s. Most of her adult life, this situation's been going on. But basically what's happening is she has really horrible trauma from her childhood, abuse, and traumatic experiences. She uses substances like fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamines, in order to numb that emotional and psychological pain. And she has a quote-unquote boyfriend who helps her with those substances, make sure she has them. She doesn't know where he lives or what he does all day. She just knows that he's her quote-unquote boyfriend, and he shows up at her hotel where she stays to pick up money. And he abuses her, especially if he can find any reason to abuse her, to perpetuate this trauma cycle. And she makes money by exchanging sex for things of value with people in our community. And this is called human trafficking. According to federal legislation, that's human trafficking. But people don't think about that. They're just like, oh, that's just some gross hooker in our community that lives in some nasty motel and she's some tweaking meth addict. But no, this is that girl that grew up in your community who experienced a bunch of trauma and is now in this horribly traumatic situation. That's human trafficking. It's sexual exploitation, and in her case is trafficking, according to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act.
That's a really rough story, and I'm glad you touched on it, because I think with like some media that's come out this year and some misconceptions on like way different nonprofits are named, she doesn't have to be locked in that motel room to be trafficked. She doesn't need to be
chained up.
Yes, because she is essentially chained up.
Or in a shipping container.
No, exactly.
Or something ridiculous and outrageous. Her story is actually incredibly outrageous already.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the hell? This is a 20-some-odd-year-old girl in your community who lives in this motel, and people from your community are coming and having sex with her for money, and some dude, she doesn't even know where he lives or if that's even his real name, he comes and beats her half to death to make sure that she keeps doing this. That's outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to make the story any more sensationalized or outrageous than that. That's pretty horrendous.
And in that story, there is a chain. It's the fact that this boyfriend keeps her addicted to these substances.
Yeah.
And creates that dependency to where even if she were to want to escape, she's probably going to come back because he's created a dependency on him emotionally and with these substances to where there's no need to put a chain around her neck because he's got her addicted. She's always going to come back to him.
I think this is one of the things that people, they don't understand. They think about trafficking and exploitation as this like hidden issue, right? They're like, oh, it's hidden in plain sight. You never see it because people are so damn sneaky. The reality is, and I was talking to her about this specifically just the other day. I was like, dude, I think that you're being trafficked. And she was like, no. She didn't believe it. She's like, no, I'm not being trafficked, because she doesn't understand the legislation. And I was like, no, listen to me. If you were going to try and get someone to like exchange sex for things of value and then benefit from it, would you choose someone who's never done that or someone who's already doing it? She was like, well, I'd choose someone who's already doing it and just get them to do it more and take their money. And I was like, yeah, that's what's happening to you. Like that's the thing. So it's hidden in plain sight because it just looks like some drug addict, right, who's out there doing crazy things. The reality is that they have horrible trauma and someone else knows that and they're taking advantage of it systematically. And they're using drugs and they're using force, fraud, and coercion, and they're using that trauma, their trauma bond, to get them to do stuff that is really horrendous and really traumatic.
I want to stay here for a bit because you told me you're not in a hurry, which is good.
No, I'm not in a hurry, man. I can talk about this all day.
No, this is good because I think this is such a good podcast because so many of our listeners and donors are from the Salt Lake City area. And so I want to stay on this for a little while because I can tell that I've touched a little bit of a nerve or a passion. Let's call it a passion. But
struck a chord, dude.
No, it's good. I think it's good. I think you can always tell when chords are struck because you hit on something that someone's passionate about.
Yeah.
I had this. Someone brought this up to me the other day where I was on a podcast and someone asked me a similar question where it's like, well, isn't it legal to go to Colombia and isn't the age of consent 14? So if it's not bad if an accountant who's in his mid-70s, which is a case that just came across my desk yesterday, goes down, lives in Colombia, and rapes little girls. And I was like, fuck no. No, that's not a thing. Like it's illegal. It's a crime. He's a monster. He's going to go to jail, and we're going to support that victim. Despite the age of consent in Colombia, the laws are different here than they are there. But because he's an American citizen and she considers herself a victim, he's still a criminal. And so we spent like a half hour on this topic because it touched one of my nerves, and I feel like I've touched one of yours, and so I'm going to keep on this topic with a couple of different questions. For one, you said men from our community, the Salt Lake community, are going and having sex with this girl for money. Who are these men? Who are they? What do they look like? Who are the clients that allow the sex industry in Salt Lake to be what it is and to keep you guys so busy? Yeah,
so as far as I can tell from research that's come out and from personal experiences working with these individuals, they're like somewhere between late 20s and like, I don't know, elderly individuals in our community. So like basically anyone like who's an adult male in your community in like the middle to upper class. That kind of makes up the majority. And something that supports that, actually this is a crazy figure. So people just, I don't think people conceptualize or really think like, oh man, there's a ton of people in Salt Lake City who are buying sex. They really don't think that. And I think a lot of other people have tried to sensationalize that to try and make it really in your face. So I'm just going to give you like really straight numbers. So think about this. Right now, my clinic in Salt Lake has worked with 400 people in the last 2 years. We're just barely touching like the tip of the iceberg there is 400 people. Because we're only out working a few nights a week, right? So we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. So let's cut that number by a fourth, just for easy math. And we're going to lowball this. So 400 people, let's just take 100. Let's say I just have 100 people that I work with, and each of them only has one sexually exploitive encounter a day, which again is a huge lowball. It's way more than that. And let's say each of those encounters is $50. So that's $50 times 100 people per day, times 365 days in a year. So that means there's somewhere around like $1.8 million flowing into sexual exploitation in Salt Lake City alone at the lowest. At the lowest. That cannot possibly be like just a handful of men in Salt Lake. $1.8 million a year. And actually it's for sure at least 400 people. So multiply one, let's just do 2 million times 4, right? So we're looking at like $8 million a year, and it's still probably on the low end, honestly. That can't be coming from just like 30 or 40 people. It's got to be coming from hundreds of people. If there are hundreds of people being sexually exploited, and those are the figures, that's the number of dollars that are going into this, on the low end, you can't have like $8 million a year coming from like, 50 to 100 men. You probably have hundreds as well. So then you look at the demographic of Salt Lake City, and if you were to take hundreds of people from that demographic, they'd probably look like me. Like 30, 40, 50 years old, middle class. We also see these guys picking up our patients, and so we see what they're driving, and we see what they look like, and that it matches that description.
You mentioned once in the screening where when you see that, like these men picking up your patients, or you see their trafficker, that your first instinct is not to call the police or not to get the Attorney General's office involved. And maybe I'm misquoting you or misappropriating your words, so feel free to correct me. But if I'm stating that correctly, why is that? And explain why that is that you would getting them involved would be not your first course of action.
Yeah, good question. So most of the patients that we work with are adults, so it changes the nature of reporting requirements. The second thing is, even if we were to report, there's not enough evidence to report to make any solid case. So we'd just be reporting things all day long. It would take up all of our time, and they wouldn't be substantial enough to do anything about anyway. But the last thing is that the healing process is the most important thing. The prosecution of crimes is secondary to that, in my opinion. The prosecution of crimes will come as people engage in their healing and they want to work with police to prosecute crimes. But typically what happens is someone who's being exploited, these are really, really hard cases to prove. Think about like a rape case, trying to prove a rape case. It's typically one person's word against another person's word, and evidence is really hard to bring forth. And so it's like that, but on steroids. These are hard cases to prosecute. And typically these individuals don't get prosecuted for trafficking, they get prosecuted for something else to try and just detain them. So we believe that if someone is being trafficked and they're healing enough, they're really engaging in their healing, it's more likely that they're going to help law enforcement prosecute a case. If they're not engaging in their healing, they're not going to help law enforcement. And if they try to help law enforcement, it probably won't go very well most of the time. That's my experience anyway, working with people. I'll give you an example. I was working with a patient for a very long time, several years, and I knew her and I knew her trafficker, and I provided care to both of them. I knew them both very well. And he went to jail on some charge. It was probably a drug paraphernalia charge or something really like a misdemeanor. He goes to jail. And while he's in jail, an investigator started working on a trafficking case against him because they had They had found a bunch of information that he was potentially trafficking several women. So the investigator got in contact with my patient, who he had been trafficking for a very long time, and said, hey, I want to talk to you about your boyfriend, and I believe that he has been trafficking you and several other people, and he tried to work with her and get her to collaborate on this case. She was still out there being sexually exploited. She wasn't healing from her trauma, and she came to me and was like, hey, this investigator came and tried to talk to me about being trafficked and all this stuff, and I think it's crazy, and I don't even know what to do about it. And I was like, oh, well, what do you think? And she was like, this is crazy. There's no way that would be happening to me, even though I knew that's what was happening to her. Helping someone who's in that kind of a situation gain insight to the fact that they're being trafficked or exploited with horrible, horrible trauma requires healing. They're just not going to get to a place where they can really conceptualize that when they're still in it. So we focus on the healing.
No, I think we do the same thing. We sometimes have to, when we have a case of a new survivor that comes into our family, we almost have to like keep the cops at bay for a while, even if it's a minor, where it's like, look, yes, you'll have access. You'll be able to interview her. You'll be able to start a case. We want that. Like we want these bad guys in jail. Mm-hmm. However, you got to give her a second to breathe. Yeah. Like she's already, when a survivor comes into like our family at Libertas, she's already exposing the most vulnerable thing that's happened to her team of social workers and therapists. Yep. Which is really hard. Like it's so hard. So like let's get her some food, let's get her some new clothes, and let's usually a lot of our survivors are not in school, they're not studying, they want to go back on the course of education, they don't have food in the house. So we got to help meet those basic needs, help them feel safe. If they have an addiction, like we obviously that's another thing that we have to work, and we let our law enforcement partners know where it's like, look, give us some time to make this, allow this survivor to feel welcome and safe in our family, in our program. And then when the time comes and she's ready, we'll help facilitate this with you. We'll help cover the cost of things. She'll give a much better interview. She'll be a much better witness. But you got to give her a second to breathe. Yeah. Like you can't, because a lot of these survivors, and I imagine a lot of the ones that you serve as well, maybe they have had an encounter with law enforcement in the past and it wasn't positive. Maybe they felt either they weren't believed, they weren't respected, or that they felt like they were just used by the law to get some guy in jail. And then with them, it's like, well, where am I supposed to live tonight? What am I supposed to do? Yeah. And especially like in our work with adults, because, you know, in I'll use Colombia as an example, and a lot of Latin America, this is pretty common throughout Latin America, is prostitution is legal when you're over the age of 18. Having a pimp is not. That's still considered trafficking, but prostitution itself as a profession is legal. And so when we're working with adult survivors, wanting to support them in their healing and get them justice and all these different things, if they are vulnerable enough to disclose the most intimate and horrific things that ever happened to them, and then we turn around and give that to law enforcement right away, we lose our reputation amongst the rest of the population that we're also trying to serve, to where they just see us as undercover informants, or they see us as part of the police, or they see us as in Spanish it's chimosos, like gossipers. Exactly. Or so. I mean, do you have that experience? Like 100%. I assume that
we have to be so careful. We don't want to be associated with law enforcement. It would be dangerous for us, you know, and it ruins that trust because we're there to help authentically engage people in their healing process. And we have to just stick to that. But, you know, the other thing that I've found is that laws change. Right? Who makes laws? It's people in the community at some level make the laws, and the laws change. Nothing Hitler did in Nazi Germany was illegal. If you change the laws to make things legal, it's not illegal. But it doesn't make something less horrific or traumatic. So, like, regardless of what the law says, Las Vegas is a good example. There are laws that allow people to exchange sex for things of value to some extent. And that doesn't make it less traumatic. Like, just because you changed the law. Like, it might change the dynamic of it a little bit. It might make it slightly less risky in some way, but it doesn't make it less emotionally and psychologically traumatic. Just because you change the law doesn't immediately make everyone less traumatized by something. So if I was like, cool, we're going to change the law, it's okay to brutally murder people. It doesn't make that less traumatic or horrific. What the hell, right? It doesn't change anything. So the reality is we at HealEx, we're not as concerned about what the law is at any given time as we are about emotional and psychological trauma in our patients. And so regardless of whether they're exchanging sex for something of value and whether or not that's human trafficking or not, according to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I actually don't care about that as much as I care about, hey, are you experiencing something really horrific and traumatic that's ruining your life? Cool. Well, we should help you with that regardless of what provisions come from the law, because that's the right thing to do, you know?
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's we get this feedback a lot from the survivors that we serve too of, when the legal case is over, what then? Like, there's still going to be some underlying vulnerabilities for me. I'm still going to want help. I'm still going to want healing. And from a law enforcement perspective, like, if the bad guy's in jail, their job is done and they're on to the next thing. Versus, like,
in a lot of ways,
that's their job.
That's their job.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do everything.
And that's something that we can't do. I'm sure that
I can't do it.
I mean, I'm sure you'd have the same thing of, like, you see something happening on the street, or you see one of your patients that you care so much about get into the car with someone, and who knows who that person is, what they're going to do, how violent they could be. I'm sure you want to kick these guys' ass on occasion. I know I do. So, but that's obviously something that we can't do. That's not in our power. And so, working with law enforcement in that roundabout way so that they can do their job, we can do ours, but the survivors, those underlying vulnerabilities that you talked about are addressed, they're supported, and once a legal case is done, they know that you aren't just going to disappear into the night along with the rest of them. I feel like that's the real way to gain access to true healing is that relational spirit that you've developed so well, that I've seen on the streets with you, and that obviously, like Brett Bunker, who was on your board for a while, he talked to me yesterday about just seeing you do that, and so I think that's a good way to go about serving your patients, is that relational piece that you've talked about pretty frequently on this podcast. I want to stick on this just for a little bit longer. This trafficking in Salt Lake City. When I went out on the streets a lot with a church that did a lot of outreach, we encountered a lot of individuals that are transgender, even and including some minors that maybe would consider transgender or homosexual. Can you talk about how that dynamic in Salt Lake City and how Salt Lake City as a whole can create an environment where someone who is transgender may end up on the streets in a situation of exploitation and trafficking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think generally people think about Utah as a very conservative place, and then they think about gender as being a political issue, which I actually think gets us off on the wrong foot entirely. For sure. Because I think that people's emotional and psychological state aren't political issues. That being said, I do think that culture plays a big role in this. And most of the patients that I've had who have been transgender specifically have come from cultures that didn't deal very well with that. And so if someone was like, hey mom, I'm not so sure about my gender and I'm trying to figure things out, parents may have just kicked them to the curb because culturally they didn't know how to deal with it. So I've seen a lot of that. And then patients end up out on the street with nowhere to go, and they're incredibly vulnerable. All of the patients that I've worked with who have been out on the streets, sexually exploited, transgender, have horrific trauma. And their risk for homicide is through the roof.
Yep.
It's really, really through the roof. It's bad news. I don't understand. I don't actually do a lot of research or really dig into it too much. I'm trying to understand gender issues that much because I'm really focused on running a nonprofit and trying to help my patients with their day-to-day things. But I work with a lot of individuals who are transgender, and it's been really rough for them.
So my last question is, and we'll move on from this topic, minors. Mm-hmm. I imagine that you guys have, in your work on the streets of Salt Lake City, come across minors that are potentially being trafficked or experiencing homelessness on the streets. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going to speak just from my hip, and correct me if I'm giving any misconceptions. I don't pretend to be an expert on human trafficking in Salt Lake City at all. I'm talking to the experts that trafficking in Salt Lake City. I imagine you don't encounter a lot of minors on the streets in Salt Lake City. I imagine you have some, but not a lot. If someone were to ask, where are kids, someone under the age of 18, minors being trafficked in Salt Lake City, my shoot from the hip answer would probably be online or in familial settings. Based on just like the news that I read from the Attorney General's office, from local police, where operations are done by law enforcement, it seems like a lot of the kids that they rescue, recover, put in, they end up in foster care or being trafficked by family members or someone who is a close family friend, like the case of the gym coach a couple months back. Am I wrong in that? Am I right in that? What is your assessment on human trafficking involving people under the age of 18 in Salt Lake City? Where is it happening? Is it happening where you guys work? Do you guys work with clients that are under the age of 18? And where are, I guess, for lack of a better term, where are the kids being trafficked in Salt Lake City?
Good question. I don't have numbers on it. From experience, I would guess that most of them are trafficked in familial kind of settings, or someone who's familiar to them, and they're probably housed while that's happening. A lot of that probably does happen through online venues. That would be my other guess. And online venues could mean even just like apps like Facebook or Snapchat or whatever, social media app that they're using to communicate. I would guess that that's the majority. Again, I don't have numbers, but that's my guess. We do see minors out on the street. There are a lot of homeless youth. The thing is, because of laws, these homeless youth that are being trafficked, it's really hard for them to identify that or to talk about that or to even give you their real age. So I've worked with many minors on the street, but they swear that they're not a minor. They don't dress like a minor. I only think they're a minor because of my experience, but I have no evidence to actually suggest that they're not a minor, and there's not a lot I can do about it because they don't give me their real name. Then they're untraceable in a lot of ways and really hard to figure out. We watch the NCMEC missing children reports. Like, we constantly are watching reports on missing kids in Salt Lake and trying to match with people that we're working with or we come across, trying to be really familiar with their faces. But when these kids are in really bad situations and they're trying to survive and they're running from a bad situation, they can be pretty sneaky, and they can really struggle to like identify who's going to be helpful to them. They're very, very concerned that they can't trust anyone. So we've worked with several minors, but I can't say for sure that they were minors. I don't have their ID. I don't have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they don't look like 12-year-olds.
No.
This is like a 16-year-old girl who looks like she's 19 and acts like she's 19 because she probably had to grow up pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's, you touched on a couple important things there. One is, I think, the importance of the education and proper media, because I mean, if a minor's on the street and there's a pimp that's taking advantage of her, she's being trafficked, but because she wasn't taken in a box to Russia, she may not be able to name that. It's like, this is what's happening to me. No, I'm just in a bad situation with a bad boyfriend.
I'm just making bad decisions with a bad boyfriend because I'm using meth.
Yes.
It's really sad. The other thing I'll say about that, though, is that so anecdotally, we have hundreds of patients that we work with, and most of them are adults at this point, and they tell us their stories, and I can't even count how hundreds of these people have told me a story where their sexual exploitation began as a minor. So we know anecdotally that is like the pathway, and that is very common.
Yeah, I've seen when I've given speeches and tell people that we work with adults, you can almost see that, at Libertas we work with anyone that's been sexually exploited or experienced sexual violence from the age of 19 months, who's our youngest survivor, to 43, I think, is the oldest survivor in our program. But when you mention adults, a lot of times people will kind of lose interest.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, well, I'm just interested in working with the children.
Yeah, I want to save the kids.
Yeah, it's like, well...
Sorry, that was really derogatory.
No,
I'm so sorry to anyone who's hearing this who feels derogatory. But I just work with these people personally.
Yep.
And you should know that they were kids and now they're adults and they're the same person.
And no one ever came for them.
No.
and they deserve just as much as compassion and respect as the next person.
Now, even though they're not kids.
Yep.
Even though they're 40.
Yep.
Or 30.
Or in their, I've encountered a survivor that was in her mid-60s.
Yeah, same. They
And
still deserve help.
And to me, like, you think of, like, I told a story to this once where I had this guy that kind of tuned out after he was, I did this outreach in Guatemala, and we were at this nonprofit. It was a good outreach, and a lot of there's this road in Guatemala, it's called La Linea, and it's just a hellhole. It's run by the gangs. It's these shacks that are maybe the size of this kitchen table that we're sitting on, and there's just a mattress, and it's just this, as long as the eye can see this, he's shack, and men come up in motorcycles, they pick a shack, go inside 50 minutes, come out, and it's a haven of scum and villainy, to quote Star Wars. And we were doing this outreach, and I met this woman who was probably in her mid-50s. We gave her a Pepsi, some food, invited her to like this program that one of my buddies was doing to help sex workers in Guatemala. And I was telling this guy this story, and he was like, oh, she's 40 or 50, like, and kind of tuned out. And he was like, whoa, did you find any kids there? And I was like, yeah, we did. But, whatever word you want to use, this woman told us that she started being sexually exploited by her father when she was 10 years old. And that's what she thought that she was worth for the next 40 years. Next 40 years being sexually exploited every single day. And when she was 18, people stopped looking for her. Exactly. People stopped looking to help her because she was over the age of 18. Yeah. But she continued in that same hell that she experienced as a child, but no one ever came for it. It's like sometimes, like whenever you turn 18, it's just magically a choice now, and now you're addiction free, and now you can catch up on your education, or your pimp is going to leave you alone. Like, none of that is true. There's not these pimps, these traffickers, these societal problems don't just go away when you're 18 and now all of a sudden becomes your choice.
Exactly.
I'm like, yeah, it was really sad that we saw, a 13-year-old girl being trafficked on this street, but the women that we were also outreaching to, the 50-year-olds, like, that is just as sad, if not more so, because you think of the life that they've had, and the exploitation and the judgment and all these different things. Like, they deserve just as much compassion. This 55-year-old being sexually exploited deserves just as much compassion as the 13-year-old is being sexually exploited.
Yeah, totally. We actually addressed that. So we just finished a documentary about our work in Salt Lake, and that's actually one of the main things that we address is this idea. People get really riled up about saving the children. There's been a big kind of social justice narrative about that in the last 5 years, and it's really sad because there are people, like, literally down the street who are being trafficked and exploited and traumatized horribly, and it probably started when they were a kid, but because they're not a kid anymore, because they're over 18, which honestly, dude, 18 is like pretty kid.
It's so young. Even now, like, we're sitting here. You're 34.
I'm 33.
I'm 33. I'm 32, and I still feel like a kid. Where I'm like, you're gonna give me a house loan at 32? Like, what are you thinking?
Is young, man.
Yeah.
But so they stopped caring. What happens to these girls when they turn 18? And they get lost to the system, and society just thinks that they're the social deviant. But the reality is they need to heal from trauma, just like anybody else. Yeah. So we address this a lot in our documentary, and I think it's an important thing that's coming into the narrative nowadays.
So tell me about the documentary. It's a good segue point. The documentary, I saw it, very good, very well done. I know that it was done by someone that you care about quite a bit. I saw it. It was awesome. I hope it's raising some good support for you guys. I hope it's raising a lot of awareness. Where did the idea come for a documentary? And I'll put this in the show notes, the trailer to the documentary. I think I can get it on YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. And so tell us about it, how it happened. I know that some of your patients were part of the documentary. How did it come to be, and why did you decide to do a documentary on human trafficking in Salt Lake City? And we're back. We had to take a little break because we've been going for a long time. Good conversation, so I'll let our audience put together why we took a little break. But Matt, tell me about the documentary. I think that's the last thing we got off on was the documentary you guys made, the need for it, why it happened, what are you guys hoping to accomplish from it, and where do people gain access to it if they want to watch it?
Dude, I was so conflicted about making a documentary about this. I was really conflicted about it because in order to do it, you have to tell the stories of the people that we serve in a really ethical way. You have to tell really sensitive stories in an ethical way. You have to do it in a safe way where you're not exposing anyone who could get hurt because of it. And so, yeah, there was a lot of... there's a big paradox for me with it. But in the end, after a lot of things, I decided to move forward with it, partially because it's important that these women's stories get told. It's really important. Their stories are part of our community and what's happening. And the only way for any real change to happen, I think, is if people understand what's happening. And the way to do that is by telling stories. And so we decided to do that. And it was a massive undertaking. So making a documentary is a big undertaking. We did it in like 4 or 5 months on like a shoestring budget, like a couple $1,000s. Like it wasn't a lot of money. It was a lot of work. So it's a very raw, authentic film. It's not like a really high production quality film where you're like, wow, I'm like watching Marvel or something. You know what I mean? Like it's not like that. This is just like straight up, like we pulled out our cameras, sat down with people that we've been working with for years and said, hey, tell us your story.
So very authentic.
Very authentic, very raw. And I actually think that's really important. There's really no production to this. We just shot the documentary, cut it the best that we could, put some music on it, and said, hey, here are some serious stories that people need to hear and understand. So the documentary follows two things mainly. It follows a story of one of our patients who I've worked with for a really long time, who was sexually exploited in Salt Lake City, and it follows her story. And it also follows essentially my story in the development of the clinic. And kind of how those two stories come together. And then there are lots of other individuals who were sexually exploited who shared their stories as well in the film. And but I will you need to watch it. You know, if you're listening to this, you really need to watch the film. You need to understand the issue. It's really specific to Salt Lake City, but we also talk about the broader issue of sexual exploitation, which can be applied anywhere. So the info is really important. That being said, the main point of the documentary, it's called The End of Slavery. That's the name of the documentary. And at HealEx, our motto is, or our tagline is, slavery ends when trauma heals. And that's really kind of the point of the documentary and everything that it talks about.
So, I'll put in the show notes, I think I may have mentioned this already before our break, but I'll put in the show notes the link to that, probably the link to like your website so people can reach out if they want to host like a private screening in their home. Mm-hmm. We're getting to the end here because I know that you have to get to work and I have a lunch meeting, but I want to ask you 2 questions. Is there a specific case that's impacted you even recently or through your career that continues to impact you or that gives you motivation to keep fighting? And then, like, I've known you for a long time, and I've seen how the desire to serve those who are sexually exploited in Salt Lake City has cost you personally. And I think if it would have cost me as much as it's cost you, I think I would have just bowed out and been like, you know what? This is, I got to step back. You didn't do that. You continue to fight. You've built your nonprofit. You purchased an ambulance. You've done all these things. And so what keeps you in the fight despite everything that it's cost you personally?
So I've had a lot of really poignant experiences with people over the last 10 years. So it's a lot of experiences. It's not just one. I don't have like one story where I'm like, that's the story. And every time someone asks me, I'm just going to share that one story because that's the only thing that keeps me going. Like, it's a lot of stories. And if I'm being honest, like, it's a burner. Like, doing what I'm doing what our organization is doing is really hard. And there's not a lot of support. Frankly, there's a ton of money out there, and a lot of it kind of goes to large pools of money and doesn't end up with small nonprofits like us that are doing really direct work. So it can be, it's like burnout is very real for us. And the work we do is hard. So I've actually been pretty burned out the last like few days. I've been like, man, I'm tired. I need to like rest so I can keep helping these people. But a really good example is last night I was working on the clinic, and I was just feeling pretty emotionally tired. And I had an interaction with a patient where we were talking about her situation very openly, and I was talking with her about very openly about her story and things she'd shared with me, and her trauma and her wanting to get out of her horrible, traumatic, exploitive situation. And I remember just looking at her in the eyes. We made eye contact, and I told her, I said, look, I don't think you feel like you're worth healing. And I think that's probably really the issue here. You have an opportunity. I can help you do this, but you need to feel like you're worth it. And she, a lot of our patients they're frantic. There's a lot of things going on. They're trying to get what they need and get back to what they're doing. There's a lot of pressure on them. There's substance use. There's a lot of mental illness and trauma. And so they can be a bit frazzled. And everything just slowed down. And the walls really dropped. And when she looked back into my eyes, you could like see her soul, you know? It was like this really connected moment. And I knew that what I was saying was landing like right on her heart. It's moments like that with people where they're like, yeah, you're right. Thanks for telling me that. You know, it's moments like that when you like really connect with other people's humanity, despite the austere environment that you're in, that keep me going. And you know, I see moments like that in my dreams at night. Like I see these people, I see their faces, and I have to help them. I have to do something about it. It's not some crazy, outrageous, sensational thing that I do. We just go and we serve them and help them heal, you know?
Yeah, and I think sometimes I hate asking this question. Maybe I'll stop asking it of like the cases that most impact you, because it kind of depends on the week. Because
yeah,
it's such like a
when
tapestry.
You're doing it constantly.
Oh, constantly. It's like a tapestry of experiences that happen week in and week out that kind of validate like what you want to do. Like, you know, Matt and I took a little pee break like 10 minutes ago, and I was telling him this insanely traumatic story that would probably, if I told the podcast, you guys would probably just tune out forever. And I can tell Matt, he's a listening ear and he understands, because he knows he has to deal with this all day, every day, just like I do. And it just continues to give the motivation to where you're doing like what you want to do, what you're called to do, like whatever verbiage you want to call on it. And after you find something like this, like you can't, I don't think, people ask me this too, of like, I had this really thoughtful guy a few months back. I was telling him about a case that I had involving this just awful human being and this awful things that he did to these survivors and animals. And he was trying so hard to get me a new job. He was like, had me set up with like interviews with all these different people, because he wanted to get me out of the industry. And I told him, I was like, you know, I thanks. Like, I know this is coming from like a place of kindness, of love, but I could not live with myself if I'm not doing everything I can to support these people that have come across my path. And I think I drop a superhero movie on probably every podcast I do. Are you big into superhero movies or no?
Not big into
Okay. Well, I love it. There's one that I really like. It's called The Dark Knight Rises with Batman. And in the very end of the movie, this terrorist is taking over the city. He's getting ready to blow it up. And Batman and his partner blow a hole in the tunnel so that people can escape. And she's getting on her motorcycle and she's ready to just get the hell out. And Batman's getting ready to go fight the terrorist. And she was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "I'm going to go fight." And she was like, leave with me. Come with me. Let's get as far away from this place as we can, because it's going to blow up. She's like, "You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything." And Batman, he stops her mid-sentence. He's like, "I have not given them everything. Not yet." referring to his life. That's what he's willing to do to do this. And so, like, sitting here with you, like, I'm reminded of that experience because I know that you're insanely talented, you speak 3 languages, have a medical degree, that if you want to do something else, you probably could. And you've given these people so much for the last decade. And I imagine your response would be very similar if someone were to say you've given them everything, that you would say, not yet. I have not given them everything yet. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, you're
okay. Right. Okay. Well, my last question to wrap up the podcast is I want to know about HealEx. I want to why it was founded, why the name HealEx, and where can people get in touch with you if they want to donate and support. I want, in this podcast, ultimate goal, 1, people know what trafficking looks like in Salt Lake City, where a lot of our donors and supporters call home, and 2, to have HealEx on their mind so that they can get in touch with you and able to support your work.
Yeah, so HealEx, the reason it's named that is because it's a combination between healing and exploitation. That's really where the name comes from. That's the focus of what we do. So at HealEx, we say slavery ends when trauma heals. And we believe that our work isn't just focused on things that at any given time fall into the federal legislation about trafficking. We're really interested in exploitation, which is a broader term that encompasses traumatic, exploitive situations. So our work is to help people heal from exploitation, and we do that through our healthcare programs. So you can find out more about what we do by watching our documentary. We'll link that. And you can also learn more about our website. So we'll link that in the show notes too, I guess. You can go to the website. You can contact us through the website. You can send us an email at info, at heal, HEAL-EX.org, HealEx.org. You can send us an email there. But we are more than happy to come and do a screening of the documentary. If you have a group of people that you think would want to see this, we're happy to bring it and show it to you privately and do a Q&A with you. I'll come and do a Q&A personally. We also do a lot of speaking. So at HealEx, I do a lot of speaking and consulting. So like if you run an organization or have a project where you're working with sexually exploited people, or you want to work with sexually exploited people in regards to their healthcare or their healing, we do a lot of consulting around that and speaking and teaching around that. So we're happy to do that as well. Ways people can get involved: you can volunteer with us, you could donate to us, you could help people learn about it by watching the documentary. You can support groups like Libertas.
Nice shout out, bro.
Yeah, you really should.
I'll add our website in the show notes too.
Yeah, you really should though. Those are ways you can get involved with what we do.
Cool, Matt. Well, I'll put that on the show notes. Thank you for coming on my podcast, spending your morning with me. The ambiance here it just actually got sunny too, so maybe I will go hiking this afternoon. Yeah. But we had an awesome morning, drinking our drinks, enjoying the rain, and having this awesome conversation. So thanks, Matt, for being on. Please, listener, if you do nothing else today, go become a recurring donor at HealEx at $10 a month or something, and support Matt and the work that he does. Because if you're looking to make an impact on survivors of in Salt Lake City, you can't go wrong with HealEx. And so thanks for being on, and I hope you'll come back soon.
Thanks, man.